Welcome to the Creators Series on the Needless Things YouTube channel, where we talk to creators about the things that they create. I'm your host, Dave West, and today's guest is Adam Martin. Adam Martin, welcome to Needless Things. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited because the timing could not have been more perfect. We got to talking about the project that you're working on. This is the perfect month to be talking about this project. But before we get down to business, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing.
About myself. So I think, the project is comics focused. It's as we'll dig into, obviously, it's a re-release of classic pre-code horror comics, hence the appropriate time of year, as you were saying. But for me, I learned to read on comics. I grew up with Asterix. Like that was, my dad hated it. He kept trying to steer me towards other books. I was like, no. I'm enjoying this. Let me keep going with that. So like Asterix and Tintin way back in the day. And then in England, 2000 AD was a huge thing when I was a kid. Not nearly as big in the States, obviously, but that was my kind of, I would say that was my gateway drug and became my kind of staple comics drug for a while until I discovered Batman and some of the Watchmen and some of the other darker American stuff. And then I've been in physical production in film and television for the last 25 years. Everything from, Transformers, the original Transformers movie way back in the day. I was the second assistant director on that.
Oh, wow.
More recently, like Dave and Barry and a show called Clipped that just came out on Hulu about the Clippers. And so lots of film production and lots of great shows, and loved it, but always had that itch to kind of produce my own stuff and create my own things. And that was what ultimately led me and my business partner, Evan Matthews, back into comics, because we were, writing together, and we were lucky enough to kind of option a few things and did some bits and pieces, but it never quite clicked. And we realized, we're writing scripts and they're ending up either on the shelves or in the hard drives of executives around LA, most of which will never see the light of day. And we were both like, wait, we love comics. Let's go back and let's recreate some of these things that we're doing. Let's adapt some of these things to the comics industry. And then that had us start a digital app that's now live. And then that started building. And about a year ago, we realized that we wanted to kind of pair the digital and the physical. And so we brought it back around into the physical world. And the project we're doing now, this pre-code horror project, is the first big release of that we're doing. And this is actually the first conversation that we're having about it. So it's world premiere. Yay.
Fantastic. Well, I'm honored because comics are near and dear to my heart. Horror is near and dear to my heart. It's funny you mentioned 2000 AD because there's a connection there that, when I was very, very young, one of my favorite bands in the world was Anthrax. And I learned a lot about horror from Scott Ian of Anthrax, and I learned about 2000 AD from Scott Ian of Anthrax.
I didn't realize. I knew he was a horror fan. I didn't realize. Wait, didn't they have like a Judge Dredd guitar?
Yes.
Or something?
Well, he has a Judge Dredd guitar, but they have a song about Judge Dredd called "I Am the Law."
I am the law. Of course, a fellow metal fan from back in the day, and yes, and I had forgotten that was the inspiration behind that.
So much of my sort of early pop culture came from a lot of the music that I was listening to, but yeah, specifically Anthrax really were a big influence on all of that.
Yeah.
But as far as the comics go, one of the things that really excited me about this was what you just said, that it's not just the digital aspect, it's also the physical aspect, because I'm still a huge fan of having a product in my hands that I can turn the pages. And it seems like a big part of what you're doing is recreating that feel. But before we get to that physical copy, what I want to talk about a little bit is just the pre-code horror comics.
Yes.
I think a lot of people touchstone for that is probably going to be things related to Tales from the Crypt.
Yep.
But if you could give us a little background on the whole pre-code thing and what comics used to be versus what most modern folks know them as now.
Kind of they've evolved into. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's been fascinating because it was such I really came to this as kind of a neophyte. Like, it's kind of like you. Like, I don't know, it's a little story. I loved horror when I was teen. Funnily enough, when I was obviously into the same heavy metal and all those great rock bands from the late 80s. And then I got married, and my wife was not a horror fan, and so kind of moved away. And now I have a 17-year-old son who's really back into horror.
My son is about to turn 17.
Amazing. And has he got your penchant for
in 10 days he will be 17, and yes, we share a lot of interests along these lines, and it's wonderful. It's amazing. Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, it's funny because he started he would tease me and be like, "Hey Dad, you want to come see the new Evil Dead?" I'm like, no. And then finally one night, I was like, all right, let's just put on the Evil Dead Rise that came out last year. And it was kind of gross, but I was like, oh, actually, wait, this is really fun. And then honestly, Talk to Me last year was probably my favorite movie of last year. I thought that was just so brilliant. And as an indie film fan, maker, whatever, it's been great to see that. So a different podcast, I suspect.
Sure.
We could clearly go off down that rabbit hole.
Well, we do take diversions here. It's not unusual.
Okay,
and I'll say,
good.
I think that's one of the things that makes horror so interesting, particularly horror films, is the independent nature of them, the creativity involved in typically having a limited budget and having to figure out how to express your ideas within very tight constraints.
Yes. And I think you're right. The creativity that goes into that. I mean, you think of the number, actually kind of, I'm obviously love movies, love entertainment, but I'm a huge kind of student of the entertainment industry as well, and independent horror, especially, like you're saying, it's amazing what can be done for these low budgets and for the needing to apply creativity to these things. And so, obviously, Terrifier 3 this last weekend, $21 million opening weekend for a movie that they spent $2 million in production on. First Terrifier. Now, that's, I think, gore to an extreme. I will not see that movie. I think that's pushing it for my blood, pardon the pun. But I love what they were able to do with that. And I love that this essentially little movie just blew out of the water. I think Blumhouse is an incredible studio and what they are consistently able to do. I really enjoyed Longlegs this summer. I thought that was fascinating. Again, $2.5 million movie. And it's funny, a dear friend of mine, you're a toy fan, but Jeff, I don't know if you're Jeff, this is actually a character from one of our other comic series. It's like a Frankenstein.
But that's beautiful with the arms. Look at that.
He's got this condition where he kind of grows extra arms, like a beard, and he has to shave them off as he goes.
That's great.
But a very good friend of mine is a guy called Jeff Yeager, who does a ton of sculptures for Sideshow Collectibles and these things. So This is one of his pieces that we're going to be releasing in conjunction with when we do the physical release of this book. We got it digitally right now, and we do the physical release. That'll be available for a thing. But so yes, sorry, I was admiring your toys. It was like, I think you'll get a kick out of this thing.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely great.
But sorry, pre-code horror comics.
Yes,
back in the thing. So, really, 40s coming out of World War II, during World War II, lots of these kind of suspense comics and espionage things, and the Nazis were the bad guys, and understandably they were the bad guys, still are. But kind of 47, 48, there started to be these horror stories within these kind of thriller comics. And then EC, actually, I think it was 1948, EC did the first full-on horror top to bottom, this is what we're doing. And then hot on the heels of that came kind of Chamber of Chills and Weird Mysteries and some of these other very specifically horror themed things. And they ended up, over the kind of, 48 to 53-ish, there was this kind of proliferation of horror comics. I think there were kind of 75 publications a month, moving tens of millions of copies a month.
Wow.
I mean, just insane numbers. And but part of what drove that, though, was the kind of disposable nature. They're essentially printed on newspaper stock. They're crappy, like 4-color press, 4-color printing, and they're very, very, very just pulpy, literally pulpy. I mean, they would be recycled for pulp, and this, crazy array of stuff, and more funnily enough, more the kind of 2000 AD model. So, multiple stories within an issue that could be 34 to 60 pages, as it were. But in conjunction with that, then kind of with the rise of, McCarthyism post-World War II and this kind of moral panic that came along with that, driven in part, driven by rebellious teens and this perception that comics were this kind of corrupting influence on the youth, and there were these series of then Senate committee Senate hearings in 53 and 54, very much pinning the blame for kind of the moral degradation of the youth on comics, which led to then the Comics Code Authority being instituted, and like this kind of series of self-regulating, self-censoring things that the comics industry felt they had to kind of inflict on themselves to survive. And so horror comics went from being these incredibly popular things to just zero over the course of a few months. And then got built up again. Of course, now, funnily enough, horror comics were singled out, but like Superman and Batman and Robin were also indicted in some of these things, like Batman and Robin as gay relationship, and this was encouraging homosexuality, and Wonder Woman was confusing because she would like create stirrings in boys, but she was also this like really strong female character when women kind of weren't meant to be strong. I mean, there's all that, so, and to be fair, some of the stuff in the comics, I mean, we've been doing this obviously deep dive because we're going to be reprinting like entire runs of these books. There are stories in there that are like, oh yeah, kids should not be reading this. And yet these were very directly marketed to kids. And so there is this thing of like, yeah, no, like a rating system of some kind. Of course, book burnings and public outrage and stuff, a little dicey, So it's just been this fascinating journey, but it's meant, for these comics, they were kind of very inspirational. Funnily enough, like Stan Lee wrote some short stories in some of these old, pre-code horror comics. Couple of other kind of big Marvel artists came out of them, L.B. Cole and Alex Schomburg, who did a ton of like Captain America covers and things. So they were this kind of creative breeding ground for the next generation of comics talent. But it was this weird situation between them kind of inherently being disposable and then being actively destroyed. They're actually some of the rarest titles, rarest books out there, which is fascinating and made it kind of prime picking as we started to look at what project to start with. Like, oh, wait, this could be really cool. And most people will never see one of these things in the flesh or even get to read them because there are so few and so it piqued our interest and we dived in.
Well, that's an interesting point because in my decades of collecting comics and going to comic conventions and comic stores and whatever else, I never really thought about it because I know the legend of the pre-code horror comics,
right?
But I can't say that I've ever seen one in person, and I've never really thought about how wild that is.
Right? Yeah, it's crazy, right? And it is that kind of perfect, like, I don't know, concatenation of circumstances of this disposable medium with this act of destruction. Now you've got these things. So it's amazing. So Suspense Comics 3 is, if you look it up, like you'll see it, it's this amazing title with this woman type of post. And there are these KKK guys with like a burning cross with swastikas on their arms. So like Nazi Klansmen about to attack this woman. And this, famous kind of iconic cover, that is actually the most expensive book to find outside of the kind of classic Marvel, DC,
right,
Superman, whatever, like Action Comics 1, of course, that commands millions, but like we just found our copy of this for this project. We literally 20 minutes before I got it, we've been hunting for one, and we finally found one. And the amount of money we had to pay was astronomical. So
Yeah,
I'll be having a drink later. Calm my nerves a
because
tiny bit.
besides the scarcity, a cover depicting something that is that, at the time, certainly sensitive topic, but these days, almost even
Yes.
more taboo. So to find something like that is probably pretty amazing. And it really is. There's an interesting sort of full circle feel to that as well, as that, look, we need to remember just how bad these things were, just what evil looks like, because that's always my concern anytime we lose any fiction of an era, or it becomes threatened by censorship or anything else, is that the whole point of period fiction is to lay out the lessons we've learned from recent history. In particularly with horror has always been very topical,
Yes.
very socially conscious. Like, that's part of the point of horror. And to lose things over time, we're in danger of losing the lessons that the creators, the writers, were trying to teach us.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, 100%. No, I mean, that famous phrase, I'm going to butcher it now, but those that don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. I feel like
Yes.
100%. And I think you're right. Comics have always held, I mean, art in general, right? But I think
Right.
in recently, comics obviously in particular have kind of held up a mirror to society. And, it goes back to the kind of X-Men rise in the, desegregation in the 60s and making the statement around that and the prejudice there. And, I think they are comics, I think, because they occupy this slightly kind of niche piece of the public consciousness, tend to get somewhat denigrated by the kind of intellectual kind of aristocracy, as it were. And that's not the case at all. I do think there's been a shift recently with, I think as television has embraced some of these. So I think you look at, it's a few years old now, but the Damon Lindelof Watchmen as a great example of just kind of a fantastic, highly intelligent look at prejudice in society and what this means in policing and how that works. And, obviously very much directed from lifted from the original comic. But I think, you get these truly exceptional pieces of art, cinematic art in this case, that then reflects really well back on the original material. So then people are like, oh, wait, that's really cool. Like, hang on, let me go back and read these things. And, oh, wait, these were the messages behind it. I mean, God, you think back at the Dark Knight Returns in the 80s and the look at the kind of Reagan presidency and the fall of the Cold War and what that, really savage social commentary happening there in the best possible way.
And that's such a great example, because I read that, to be honest, when I was probably a little too young to be reading it. But
always,
as I've read it over the years, it's meaning to me, because of course all art has an element of interpretation. The person taking it in does, in a way, put their own viewpoint on it. And over the years, how I've taken in Dark Knight Returns has evolved, because the first time I read it, it was just, wow, old man Batman is a real badass. Like, that was kind of it. Because I was still, I would say at the point I read that book, the Adam West Batman was probably still the most prominent Batman,
like the touch
in my
point
mind.
for
Right. I was aware that comic book Batman was different, but he was still kind of the Batman. And then to read this extremely violent, very sort of taking on, being a kid in the 80s and just having accepted consumerism and the way that it penetrated every aspect of our lives, and maybe not being able to verbalize that that's what I was looking at, but seeing that looked at in a more cynical way. And then just over the years, I guess, understanding the point better every time I read it.
Right. I think you're right. Yeah, that depth of understanding that you are now able to look at, and as I think it's that dual thing, right? Is that your knowledge of the world around you expands, and therefore you're able to read more into this thing. And I read it again recently, actually, again, with my son, son is actually super into manga, which is really interesting. And so I've been rediscovering that. I've been not rediscovering, discovering that as an adult. But he obviously grew up with comics and stuff as well. But him reading it recently, a couple of years ago now, I guess, and I took the opportunity to read it again and had that same experience as you. And the biggest thing to me, which is kind of shockingly prescient with that book, is the talking heads on television. All those pages full of these incredibly kind of trite, we're going to talk about this, but then there's this terrible catastrophe. But hey, what about the weather?
And that's what we're looking at every day now.
Yes.
That he's almost depicting that 24-hour news cycle in Dark Knight Returns. It's incredible.
Yes. Yes.
Well, rather than turning this into a Dark Knight Returns breakdown, which granted,
again, there were worse things.
At some point down the road, maybe we do an episode for that. But I do want to get back to these horror comics. Since we're here and I've got the list right in front of me, just real quick, I'm going to run down what you guys are looking at as far as these reproductions go. You've got Suspense Comics number 3, which you mentioned,
which is
which is the big, wild, crazy, evil cover. But also issues 8, 11, and 12. Punch Comics number 12 and number 9.
Yep.
Chamber of Chills number 19 and 23. Weird Mysteries 4, 5, 6, and 12. And Weird Chills 1, 2, and 3. And what I wanted to ask is this a matter of some of these are heavy hitters that you really wanted to launch with, and some are just, we've got our hands on these, let's go ahead and make them part of the process and get them in front of people? How is the selection for these titles?
So we've actually, this is again kind of fun because you're the first person I get to really talk to about this. We've got part of what we're doing with this launch. It's really a kind of two-pronged approach. So the first thing we'll be doing is this collection of we're calling it the Frightening 15. So this collection of these 15 just kind of really, as we look back in the history, and we've Adam Fortier is our head of publishing. He helped launch Boom. We've been working with actually Ross Ritchie at Boom as well. We kind of put a little brain trust together as we wanted to dig into the horror comics of it all. What do we feel are these kind of iconic issues? What are these things that really were these, kind of cultural tentpoles? And this was the list that we came up with for this 15 kind of core offering. It's great if I'm interested in this, if I'm a horror fan, if I want to see some of these things, this batch of 15 will give me a great overview of this, this kind of 5-6 year period, really allow me to dig in. And there's some genuinely creepy stuff in there. There's some amazing, wacky, it's great. But then in addition to this, we're also actually doing the complete run of Suspense Comics 1 through 12. So if you're you know what I want. Oh. So yeah, I love the idea of all these things, but I know I've read about Suspense Comics. So I'm going to buy a complete stack of Suspense or Chamber of Chills. I know that Chamber of Chills, the glass, the woman with there's this amazing cover with there's this woman smiling, and there's the hand of death kind of holding a wine glass, and there's it over her eye. There's a skull. Amazing artwork. But I want the entire Chamber of Chills run, but then these other ones I don't care about. So we've got this kind of combination of here's the highlights of the genre from this period, and then here, great, you want everything? Great. Here's the entire run of Suspense and Punch and Chamber of Chills and Weird Mysteries.
Well, so you mentioned.
It allows you to dig in, which is great.
You mentioned that cover with the wine glass, and that, of course, famously, the Misfits pulled that art for Mommy, Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight? Or no, Die, My Darling. Sorry. Right?
You know what?
Now that I've said it,
I should know that. And
right?
I know, obviously, Die, My Darling is amazing. I love the Metallica cover of Die, My Darling, especially. But yes.
And to go back to metal introducing us to things, Metallica is how I discovered the Misfits back in the first place. But one of the great things about this, and that should appeal to that metal connection, going through these, you're going to find so many instances of the artwork that inspired the album covers, the t-shirts, the, whatever else of all these metal and punk bands that we all grew up with.
Yeah. No, you think about like Eddie, Iron Maiden's Eddie as an example of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny because I so appreciate this because I actually hadn't. I've been so kind of in the weeds with like, oh, this is cool stuff with the blah, 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 we've got to find the things that I actually hadn't made that through line connection. No, Dave, thank you. I so appreciate that. That's brilliant.
The metal horror connection has such a long history and makes so much sense. And if you could look back, talking about album covers and T-shirts, one of the seminal metal artists, Pusshead, you look at his art and you look at the art in these books and you see his influences, boom, right there in front of you.
Front and center. And of course,
Absolutely.
like, yeah, I mean, so much. I mean, God, you go back to the late 60s and Black Sabbath and all their imagery and all that stuff. Given that you're a metalhead, sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second.
Please do.
My guitar back here.
I have been looking at it the whole time.
That's Ozzy Osbourne's signature on the guitar. I did a commercial with him, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, and super sweet. His assistant, I was chatting with his assistant, and I was like, do you think Ozzy would sign my guitar for me? And he goes, yeah, of course, he'd be delighted to. So like at lunch, I ran up the Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard in LA, and we were like broke. I was a PA, like we did not have money. And I was like, love, I'm going to go buy a guitar. I have to do this. And because I wanted a Randy Rhoads guitar since I was 14 and just was never able to swing the money for it. And that was just like, no, I have to do that. So as a fellow metal fan, you might get a kick out of that.
That's fantastic. Well, that's just the guitar itself I've been looking at, but the story to go along with it is phenomenal. I love that. That's great. And yeah, Ozzy also, so much of Ozzy Osbourne's imagery just directly out of what we're talking about today.
100%. And then just and I think you do see, even though, I think it is that I think it's part of the conversation with AI, obviously, is like where artists have always been inspired by previous artists that have come along. AI is obviously distinct from that, and we, just to be very clear, like we're not using AI in any of this system. Like we're very much it's all hand scanned and touched up and all this stuff. But it is this interesting thing. I feel like even though these comics in the early 50s got banned, you feel the impact of them through pop culture and through the art that kind of followed them. So there was this darker turn, even with the kind of more mainstream comics, as these artists were getting hired out of this to go and then do Captain America or Aquaman or whatever, Submariner or whatever it might be. They were able to bring the education and the kind of influence of these books into their subsequent art. And now, obviously, Oni Press, I think it is re-releasing they've actually got a new imprint of EC comics. Like they're releasing new horror comics from the EC library, which is really exciting. So I do feel like there is this kind of resurgence of horror. We did an episode. Eben and I did an animated episode of Creepshow a couple of years ago now.
Wow!
Really fun.
Yeah. That Creepshow revival has been just unbelievable.
Been amazing. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. I feel like it's kind of bubbling again. It's never gone from movies, but I feel like it is comics and collectibles. I feel like it's having a resurgence, which makes me very happy.
Well, and TV, because that's one of the things. Again, growing up when I did, you had these shows late at night on USA, like Werewolf or whatever else, these horror TV shows that were a thing, or Tales from the Crypt, which we've already mentioned on HBO, that was started in 1989 and was destination viewing for me. Of course, I had the lights off and I was asleep and certainly not watching HBO.
No.
But horror on TV is something that I feel like we went through a couple of decades of it not being that prevalent, and now probably largely thanks to The Walking Dead, but also things like American Horror Story. I feel like we're in a good place with horror in all mediums right now, which makes it a particularly good time to be revisiting these roots of horror in America.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, 100%. I think the success of The Walking Dead kind of drove that. You had the kind of access to it as well with True Blood, I think, beat Walking Dead just for a little bit.
Mhm.
Like, it was a sanitized version of horror, but it was certainly, it was pretty graphic and it was
Yeah, yeah.
good HBO fare. And then, but I think it didn't have the kind of grit of Walking Dead, obviously. And now, yeah, there's a lot of good, even things like The Last of Us. I mean, I feel like there's obviously
Yes.
solid horror themes to it. I wouldn't classify it as a horror show, but it's certainly the Venn diagrams of the, science fiction and drama and horror. Yeah, it definitely occupies the middle of that.
Well, and that's another good point, though, is that horror can be many different things to many different people and encompass a number of genres. Like, I would say that Last of Us could absolutely be somebody's horror. If my mom watched it, it would be horror to her. You know what I mean? Like, so the horror depends on the individual's definition, and I think that's another thing that makes it so magical is we all have our own horrors.
Yes.
That we bring in and that we take away.
Yeah. No, and it's obviously there's you've got the extreme, the terrifiers of the world are like, oh yeah, psychotic clown killing people with a chainsaw. Yeah, no, buckets of blood and gruesome. But then something like Talk to Me that we chatted about briefly earlier, that's essentially a psychological thriller with a couple of horrific scenes, but most of it is just bloody, scary girl trying to figure out what's happening. And I thought it was just brilliant, like just brilliant.
There's so many different ways to approach it. It really is such a genre of endless opportunity.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about specifically. You mentioned it. The restoration process. What does go into when you find one of these? Because as you mentioned, these are disposable comics. They're, 60, 70 years later,
essentially
they're
newspaper.
Delicate. They're ready to fall apart. How do you go about scanning these and restoring them?
So, I mean, it's this kind of combination of like science and art and black magic that we figured out to try and get these things. So, obviously, yeah, we're handling them incredibly carefully. We actually have built the machine that we use to do the scanning. They're like 8K scans of these comics, and we built it specially so that we didn't crease the spines, and we had to precisely this thing of like, a normal scanner, if you open one of these books flat out, you're going to break the spine immediately, and then it's done. So no, how do we figure this? How do we get them done? How do we eliminate the? I mean, it's all the kind of technical wizardry that went into that, which was huge. Then there is obviously kind of we've got our kind of touch up processes and all those things. What we have is, and I think what is really fun about these as opposed to previously released versions is because I think combination of kind of because they're so fragile and because actually the scans, if you're doing just kind of a normal scan of these books, you don't get any of like the real dot patterns, you don't get the colors coming in the same ways, whereas because of the way we're able to do it, you can zoom in on these, and we've done it a few times, like you can zoom into like the pores on the face, and it's the dot patterns, and it's the texture of the paper, and it's all this stuff that goes into it, like the kind of 4-color printing, and it's like, oh, the blue is here but the red is just offset, like it's you can see those slightly fuzzy outlines and things, like it's the level of reproduction is incredible. And then we've also sourced, because we've got the actual books, we've sourced paper that is as close as we can. Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Forgive me. We've sourced paper stock that is as close as we can get to identical to what they're originally printed on as well. So then you get this, like you're going to have this like crazy high res print on this paper, kind of, typically kind of slightly oversized paper stock with this thing, and then we're releasing these as sets, but they're all individual issues. So you're getting bagged and boarded things. So, you get, whatever it is, Suspense Comics 3, 8, and 12. Well, great. Here's a bag. Here's 3. Here's 8. And so you can read these things and then put them back in. But it means you're getting that kind of physical thing that you were talking about. That tactile,
the textures. And
yes.
and that to me over the years has all, and look, I love it that we're able to get reprints of old classic comics and you don't have to spend $700 to read the first appearance of Spider-Man or whatever else. But one of the things that's always kind of disappointed me when I read those reprints is it's on modern paper stock and it's glossy and it doesn't have that texture, or they go in and they remaster it too much and you lose what you were talking about with the dot and that, like, I want as close to that original experience as I can get. I don't want it so clean and shiny that I'm not getting the real deal.
Yes, I mean, look, we're speaking the same language. That's exactly what we're going for with this, and it is that. Yeah, we just want to give that sense of like, oh, I've jumped in my DeLorean and gone back to 1948 and grabbed grab this thing off the spinner rack. Like, this is awesome.
So let's talk a little bit. The Kickstarter page is live, though the campaign has not started yet. It's currently kickstarter.com/project/macroverse/precode horror. Although we all know how to Google. Everybody Google precode horror comics Kickstarter. You'll find it. And we'll also have links in the description. Amazing. So click on those links. But do you have any kind of time frame yet on when you're expecting to launch, what you're putting together?
100%. So we're in kind of pre-launch phase now. We're going to be doing a couple of fun kind of joint things just before Halloween. But the idea is the 29th. Not the idea. We will be kind of going live on the 29th, basically.
Oh, perfect.
So it's just in time for Halloween. We kind of wanted that little bit of ramp up into Halloween just to have the fun of that. We'll be live for 4 weeks. And then because we're going to be in pre-production and getting all these things ready, our goal and we're literally having a production meeting this afternoon about this. We'll be able to deliver these by the holidays. So if it's Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever else you celebrate at that time of year, if you're giving presents and you want some of these things to be giving away, we will be able to get these to you by the holiday time.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We want to just it's the hunt for the books delayed us a tiny bit because we knew we needed these. It was like, we just want to be really sure that we've got these things in hand before we're telling people that we're gonna. But it's amazing. It's amazing.
As a family who have skulls and zombies on our Christmas trees, that couldn't be more perfect.
You know what? I feel like that's I think that's good. I like that.
have these wrapped up in some nice black wrapping paper right under the tree.
Perfect. You feel like you need like the black and red, but black wrapping paper with some red bows around them. I feel like that'll be good. Yeah.
Absolutely. So anything else generally about this project that you wanted to talk about while we're here?
No, I mean, we've really hit everything. I think we're just excited to be getting this out into the world. With this idea of authentic editions, which is what we're calling this process, this is the first. We've had this idea bubbling now for a year and a half, 2 years of like, how do we do this and what do we do and what's the first project? How do we line up get everything in place? Just all the kind of logistics of this thing. And so this is the first project that we get to launch and do this process with. And with the goal of, we know what our next one's going to be that's coming kind of right around the holidays as well. Very, very different, but still these like classic golden age books. And then, we're talking to a bunch of other publishers about like, great, what are the other things we can be doing? Is it, I don't want to kind of let the cat out of the bag, but we're chatting to a bunch of different people about
we got to save something for next time.
Facsimile. So I've been recording the video today, and I had to say like these ultimate facsimile editions. I hate that word so much. It's so hard to say, but yes, we're basically this facsimile. I keep messing it up. Process. We're just kind of testing and perfecting with this first thing. We've done some initial tests, so we printed it. We know it works, and it's great. But this will be the first big project that we're doing it with, and the first of many.
Excellent. Well, Adam, thank you so much for your time. This has been an awesome conversation. Before we go, Everybody needs to check out Pre-Code Horror Comic Book Collection on Kickstarter. Notice I avoided that word. We will have a link to it in the description. Where can we follow you on the socials?
We're basically at Macroverse kind of everywhere. So Instagram,
Okay.
Twitter is the main thing. That's our handle. I might have personal accounts, but those tend to be, they're pictures of my pit bull chasing the cat. That's all. Playing with the cat, I should say.
Which, by the way, excellent entertainment. I mean, that's nothing wrong
look,
with that.
there's nothing like seeing this large pitty playing with this little kitten and being incredibly sweet with her. It just makes me happy. So yes.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to get my hands on some horror comics. And everybody watching, go get some horror comics and go check out this Kickstarter. We're very excited about it. Like I said, link in the description.
Amazing. Dave, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great chat.
Absolutely.
Smash that like button if you like Needless Things.